Okay, what we got here, there's been some thinning work going on, and the big heavier timber has been wood has been put to one side, but what we got left here is the branch wood. Now it is useful as fuel. These smaller section D-limins make very good fuel on small wood burners, and also it's very good stuff when you're lighting your fire generally, to put 4 or 5 pieces of this on top of your kindling when it's well dried, because that then ignites and it gives a really good start to the fire, which is all about making a good fire. It's how you start it. And it was sort of the sized wood that would have been used in the old bread ovens years ago, because you get all of this this size, this section, burning the entire circumference, and it throws massive heat because you've got a lot of surface area burning. And it was the kind of wood that was used on the old ranges to cook on, boil and fry. In fact, when I was a boy, my grandmother, I lived with my grandparents, this is the sort of wood my breakfast was cooked on every morning on the old range. So this is a piece of ash, and ash is particularly interesting to an Englishman because it's from our ancient mythology, that we have our own ancient mythology, by the way. Greek mythology has nothing to do with the English. It was something that was picked up on by the scholars and the wits and wisdoms of the 19th century, and because it was all very intellectual. But we have our own mythology as Englishmen, which we share with the Scandinavians, because we are tribally a northwestern Germanic people. And central to our mythology is the great world tree Yggdrasil, which was an ash tree. So whereas an Irishman would carry a shillelagh, if you are a true Englishman, you should really walk and carry with you an ash staff. And it's a hangover, as I say, from our tribal days, because in Anglo-Saxon and Viking days, our ancient history, our spear handles and shafts were made out of ash. So it's a hangover from that. When you're out in the woods, to me, it doesn't feel right unless I'm carrying a staff with me, and it's just that hangover, I think. Anyway, this is all firewood, and this is the sort of stuff that generally isn't bothered with, but it is valuable. I've got a piece of wood here, which is a piece of birch, which again is useful as firewood. Birch is the symbol of love and fertility, they tell me, but it's a very nice wood. They're nice trees. I like birch trees. I like to walk in amongst them. In the winter, that white bark, it's really very nice. There's another piece here, good fuel wood for small stoves, and it's a piece of oak, an oak D-linen. And it doesn't take long to do it using this type of axe. Some people like to use a drill hook, but to be honest with you, not many people bother with this kind of wood. I like to use this axe lightly, and it's surprising how quick you can just do these jobs and harvest this kind of wood. And there is a market for it, if you'd mind to harvest it and sell it. The beauty is when you've got wood of that section with the sap in it, you don't necessarily need to put it on a saw bench to saw it. You put it on a log, and depending on the thickness, 1 or 2 swipes with the axe like that, and it's cut quickly, simply, just like that. Okay. Okay, now it's down to some real hard work. A lot of the wood I take out of these patches is particularly inaccessible, particularly when it's wet as it is now. And the only way you can get it out is on your shoulder. You can't get in here with machinery, you can't get too close to it. And in a lot of instances I've got 200 yards to walk with it. But it is all good fuel wood, and if it isn't, if I don't take it out, it just lies here and rots. So if you'll forgive me, I've got to get on with some work. Timber, you see, firewood traditionally was bought and sold by volume. Today there is this trend to sell it for firewood particularly by weight, by the ton, half a ton or what have you. But my old grandfather, who taught me just about most of what I know, if not more, all of it, he always went by the old ways, volume, and the traditional way to measure this kind of wood was by the cord, which is a stack of wood 8 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet, 128 cubic feet. You have a thing called a face cord, which is a stack 8 feet by 4 feet by 16 inches, which is a third of a cord. And then you have, in firewood, if you're delivering it, you can sell a rick. You can sell it, the old way was sell it by the rick as well, and a rick of firewood was a stack which was 8 feet long by 4 feet high by whatever, and it was one block depth by whatever block length the customer wanted it cut to. So those are the old measurements, and I still sell mine by volume, by the cubic metre a steer, sometimes a cubic yard if somebody wants a smaller load. And my kindling wood, because I do kindling wood and I work my kindling wood out of the round, and it's all done by hand, split by hand as well. I sell that by the peck or by the bushel, and a peck is 2 gallons dry measure and a bushel is 8 gallons dry measure. That's the old way. I'm well aware of how privileged I am to come into woods like this to earn my living and a portion of it, if not all of it. And I think it's very important. Woodlands, they are a natural environment, and it was Peter Scott many years ago, the great naturalist, one of his nature programs, he said, talking about wild critters and wild creatures, he was saying about how we refer to it as their natural environment, and how we forget that it's our natural environment as well. This is our natural environment, not just the critters, because it's the environment where we evolved as a species as well. So I always remember how lucky and how privileged I am, and I do remind at times young people that I'm involved with through sport, young farmers and what have you, how privileged we are. But we're here to do some work, and I'll just show you some of the tools that I work with. I still work a lot with the axe, and the axe is probably, in my opinion, the most abused tool in any farm or contractor's yard. It's looked upon as being a sledgehammer that just happens to have a cutting edge on one side. And I really have yet to walk into a farmyard or a contractor's yard where there happens to be an axe and pick it up and actually see it in a good state of fettle, particularly the cutting edge. And the pole, that's the pole, the back of the axe there, it tends to get used to knock nails in and generally used as a sledgehammer, and that is probably the last thing that you should do with an axe, because the back edge and that, it isn't hardened, it'll mushroom over to distort, and you'll distort the eye of the axe, which is that little bit just there that the handle actually goes through. If you start hammering on this, or you use it to hammer with, what happens is you bulge the eye there, and I've seen extreme cases where the axe has fractured across there, and it's then scrapped. In fact, this axe I found underneath a hedge quite a number of years ago, broken handle, and nondescript, I don't know what the make is, but as long as you keep it sharp and you look after it, it'll do a good job. And I make the handles myself. I shaped that out of a piece of ash. I felled the tree, in fact, quite a long time ago, then left it to dry out, and I shaped my own handles, because most of the handles you'd buy, they ain't just quite right. Whereas when you shape it yourself, you can do it quite quickly when you get a bit of practice, and you make the handle properly. That bit on the end there, that's always referred to as the fawn's foot, that little bit of a handle. But ash is a good wood to make the handle out of. It's nice and springy and strong. And these axes here, This little axe here goes with me wherever I go. That axe is with me, whatever I'm doing. I always have an axe with me. And these, in fact, these 3 axes are all made by a Swedish firm, Brooks, and they are probably the finest axes in the world. No axe in the world matches a Gränsfors. That's the small forest axe, just tucks nicely in your belt, and that's the full-size Scandinavian forest axe. And for a de-limbing job on something like a birch, when you've just felled it and it's sort of towards autumn time, early winter, and it's still got the sap in it, you can de-limb a birch tree quite quickly with an axe. You'd be surprised how quickly you work up the trunk, taking the limbs off. But they feel like a wand in your hand, Brooks axes. They're just magical. Well, they are to me anyway. And that's another Brooks axe. This is a carpenter's axe. Now you might think, what would a carpenter want an axe for? But you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised just what you can use an axe for. A carpenter, he can use it as a plane just to fetch off the last little bit on a job if he's fitting a door and it's all he's got to hand. It's a very, very useful tool for any carpenter to have. In fact, Brooks axes are really well made. They're all handmade, and each one bears the initials of the blacksmith that made them. This is LP, that's Leonard Peterson, one of the blacksmiths there. And that one's made by MM, that's I think it's Marriott Matheson. But each one bears its own initials. This is a splitting maul. This is what you use for splitting heavy timber and firewood. And the pole on the back of this axe is hardened, and you can actually use that as you would a sledgehammer for driving in wedges into the timber to split it. That's a splitting maul. People look at this little axe here sometimes and say to me, that's another axe I found in a scrapyard. People look at that and say, well, that handle's too short for that big head, but no, I shaped that handle myself specifically to that length because I use this little axe for just trimming up and doing rough carpentry jobs. In fact, we were doing some work with some sleepers some weeks ago, and the ends needed to be taken down to slot down in between some RSJs, and the guy that was working with me wanted to get the chainsaw and take the sliver off. Well, that's all well and good if you're quite happy to have that dust and all that muck in your face with creosote and what have you, but I don't like it. So I said, well, just score the end of the sleeper across the right distance back, and then we turn it on edge, and with this axe you just down with it, and you take that off much quicker than a chainsaw. Just take that little bit off to fettle it down. And then our axes. Now what we're going to do in a minute, we're going to split some timber. How you doing there? Okay, we've got a piece of sycamore here. We're gonna be splitting these down. They're 3 foot lengths. We're going to split them down, and then they'll be stacked to finish off drying for fuel wood. And it's, as I say, it's a piece of sycamore. And the sycamore tree is it bears some significance to English history, quite a pivotal point, I suppose you might say. And I ain't getting political now, but it was underneath a sycamore tree around about the mid-19th century that the Tolpuddle martyrs met to discuss their grievances, and it was underneath a sycamore tree they just fell foul of the law, and resulted in their being deported to Australia. So there, the old sycamore. It was imported to this country several centuries ago, and it was planted a lot for shade purposes and what have you, but it's quite reasonable fuel wood. Now I stand this one ends a split going through there. We probably get in like this. It's just to demonstrate that you can do this without having a fancy machine and an engine roaring away. These things can be done still quite simplistically and just as quick as loading it onto a machine, probably quicker even. And it's a lot more pleasant to do it like this because you're not being deafened by a roaring engine, and you haven't got all that diesel fumes and smoke and all the things associated with it. Well, that's a smaller one there now. We've got a bigger butt over here. Sycamore again, and it's quite a large chunk. But you don't have to be intimidated by its size. It'll take a bit more doing, but if you handle it correctly, you can get it done just the same. And I like it in 3 foot lengths because it's in position right. I can stack it better in 2 lengths now. I'm going to use the wedges on this one and the maul. Now, splitting it like timber like this, it was a very famous man in history. Point of fact, the 16th President of the United States of America, Mr. Abraham Lincoln. Before he went into politics, he earned his living as a young man, and a very skilled man he was with an axe. He earned his living cleaving timber like this, in this way, with an axe and with wedges, cleaving it down for fencing rails and working construction and building property and houses and things like that and barns. But that was Mr. Abe Lincoln, a very great man. The idea I split it down into 3 foot lengths is because I cut my fuel wood and logs down to 9-inch nominal length, and if I cut it down to 3 foot, cord them down to 3 foot, every time I pick up a piece of timber, I'm picking up 4 logs. And it has to be stacked and stacked right. My old grandfather taught me, as I said before, most of what I know. In fact, he was born and raised just about 2 miles as the crow flies over there. And you have to stack timber right to dry it out. It's not just a case of stacking it any old way. Well, you can see more or less how easily it can be achieved, even a big butt like that, and you just keep going on, splitting it down, and you've got your lengths there to stack. You can split them down again if you like. To stack, to dry out, to make decent fuel wood, because that's the essence, it must be dry. Well, when I was 7, I had my first axe given to me by my grandfather, 7 years of age. In fact, I think if I remember right, it was probably my birthday. It was given to me to go out into the wood yard with him and cut some wood and generally do some work and learn. And I've had an association and I suppose some would say a bit of a love affair with them ever since. I think it'd be fair to say if I was banished to live in the woods and I could only take one tool with me to survive by, it'd probably have to be an axe. I could build a shelter with it. I could even skin a deer with it and butcher him, and I think I could get by on it.